But this is indeed Between Two Nerds, or also How to Become the World's Third Best LabVIEW Programmer, also known as a presentation that Darren Nattinger roped me into last minute and then wouldn't let me work onto it until about a week before, which will be reflected in a variety of the quality of the slides. Let's go ahead and dive into what makes you possibly the world's third best LabVIEW presenter. Actually, you know,
one of you is going to be the world's third best LabVIEW presenter after this presentation.
Indeed.
The rest of you might learn something as well.
I believe so. So let's go ahead and move along. There we go.
All right, so as usual, when I work on a presentation, I try to make it available for everybody to download. We just finished the slides a few minutes ago, which will be a point we discuss later on in the presentation. But yes, later on today, the presentation will be available at the bit.ly link that you can see on the screen. And you're the one that made the QR code. Does it actually go to that URL, or does it go to something else?
That's a really good question. I think it does.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure.
What might it go to if it didn't go to the presentation?
I don't, something RF related.
Okay.
There you go.
Well, I didn't even have to ask.
All right, so the agenda for today, what we're going to get through is we're going to talk about generic ways not to suck at presenting. Part of this whole presentation process of distilling all the information is like, there's a really clear line. There's just some stuff that people do, that we see, that we do, that just sucks. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to try to get your headspace in a right perspective so that you can understand what makes a LabVIEW presentation unique from other ones, and then we can talk about the rest. From there, we're going to talk about, all right, how do you separate what belongs in PowerPoint versus what belongs in LabVIEW? And lastly, as Darren always has in his presentations that everybody loves way more than mine, is tips and tricks associated with things. Well, it's true. I mean, it's amazing what you do and how people love your presentations overall. And it's usually presents very practical in nature.
Thank you, Norm.
Absolutely. All right. So prologue, hit it.
Yeah. So just to put it out there, presenting is hard, and we have total respect for everybody that is getting out there, putting themselves out there, and presenting on LabVIEW topics, whether it's today at the GLA Summit or at a GDevCon or at any of these types of events. Norm and I really like that everybody's willing to put themselves out there and present on LabVIEW. And there's going to be points in this presentation where we talk about something that may not be a best practice, and you may think that we're calling you out specifically. You may think, oh, great, they're talking about that time that I presented at that thing and did the exact same thing they're talking about. We're totally not talking about you.
But we may have reviewed
maybe
different presentations and got inspiration at one point in time or another.
From something that you may or may not have exactly done in a video we just looked at yesterday. But totally not calling you out specifically.
Yep.
And here's the thing. Norm and I have both given really bad LabVIEW presentations. This one might be one of those. We don't know. I mean,
true.
You know, maybe 40 minutes from now, it's going to be at least one. But you know, in general, I would say that even though we sometimes screw up, that's okay.
Yeah.
I would say that there's going to be presenters other than us in this conference today and in the conferences at other times that screw up, and that's okay.
Oh yeah, yeah. It's about being able to be adapt and just, I mean, be okay with not being okay.
Right, right. So here's the deal. You know, Norm talked about the first rule earlier. Let's talk about the 0th rule, which is the worst is probably going to happen. Norm's computer is probably going to crash at some point in here. I'm probably going to drop my clicker. We may end up getting into fisticuffs at some point. Something could go wrong. So just prepare for things to go wrong. This is like the advice I give my kids. Like, the key to happiness in life is setting low expectations. I mean, if you expect the worst, then you're always going to be happy if, you know, worst or better happens, right?
I like to say, blessed beyond what I deserve on a regular basis.
Right. So we are the self-proclaimed world's best LabVIEW presenters, which means we're definitely going to screw something up in this presentation.
You know, I want to clarify this one, however. I've been watching the GLA Summit, just even at the beginning. I woke up at 6 a.m., started watching some of the things, and some of the GDevCon ones as well. And you know, you pack the rooms, and you're probably usually at the top, but I feel pretty awkward saying that I'm even in that top 3 anymore, because there's been amazing presentations, even the ones people started today. So we see bad presentations, they happen all the time, but there's actually a lot of really good ones that not only we saw today, but have happened pretty recently too. So So we'll see. Maybe I'll be looking to become the third.
Did you just completely throw away the whole premise of our presentation today?
No, you're teaching me.
Oh, we'll see about that. So we, along to that point, we consulted no external resources when we put this presentation together. We did not watch any TED Talks. We did not watch any YouTube videos. We just decided to take our instincts and put them into a presentation. So some of the things that we are talking about, we might tell you this is the right way to do things, and if you were to consult some other resource, they might say that it's not. But despite the fact that we're kind of making this up as we go along, we got scheduled anyway, so you're stuck listening to us for the next 40 or so minutes, so maybe, hopefully you'll learn something. Let's see what happens.
Indeed. I think we'll all walk away better off. Is everything still okay with the mic?
It's glitching in and out.
Oh, that's a bummer. Technology, right? Something's going to screw up. We've already got our first screw up out of the way.
The zeroth rule.
Exactly. So I'm prepared for it. We'll just talk really loud and go straight into my microphone. We'll just yell into my computer the entire time. All right.
Ah!
Pretty much.
Okay.
All right. So just a quick background in terms of Darren on this one. First off, it's Nattinger.
Hard G.
Hard G in that one. Always pronounce the g-g-g-ger. Remember? So don't do the Nattinger. Otherwise, you'll hear him go ger.
And here's the thing. I hesitate to tell them the wrong way to say it, because then people will hear this and they'll think back and they'll be like, wait, he said the right way and he said the wrong way. Which one was the right way?
Always ger.
It's, yeah, hard G.
Hard G.
Thanks, Carl.
But indeed, what started how many years ago? 24?
Almost.
24 years ago at NI, doing what we formerly used to call applications engineering, doing support, right?
Yes.
All right. And then you created a variety of features in LabVIEW themselves. LabVIEW built into LabVIEW.
Correct.
Right? Quick drop and everything else associated with it. VI analyzer as well, right?
If it's written in LabVIEW and it's part of LabVIEW, at some point I probably worked on it.
At some point in time. Sweet. So then in 2020, I convinced Darren that joining me and playing with me in technical support engineering, the old AE, now what you, when you submit a service request or a support case, where does it go? It goes to the pile of people like Darren and me and other people that we're trying to raise up as well. And it's been awesome to have you as a mentor in the team, an expert. You do field escalation, some cases occasionally for the big, hairy, scary customers out there in the world, and then trying to make everybody else smarter along the way too. So a key person in the department at this point. And then I'll let you describe this part of it.
Yeah, I love presenting. I love being in front of people. And you know, since I love LabVIEW, those two things sort of come together in the fact that I love giving LabVIEW presentations. I've given so many over the years.
You just gave two, or no, you gave one.
I just gave one and I'm giving another one later.
So this is 3 today alone.
And the presentations that I sort of curate and keep ready to go at short notice, those are all available at dnat.org. So if you have not visited that website yet, it's basically a list of all of my presentations. The slides and the demos and the video recordings are all there. And maybe once every year or two, you know, something bubbles up to the point where I want to put that sort of quality work into it and publish it on that webpage. So as the years go on, we should be seeing more and more LabVIEW content appear there.
Yep, and there's what, bit.ly/dnat as well, that just kind of has...
Well, that's the thing.
Like getting deprecated?
bit.ly/lvdnat was apparently too hard for people to remember. I'm looking at you, Jorg. So I made an even easier one to remember, dnat.org. If you cannot remember that one, I have lost all hope.
So for those of you who want to understand why Darren believes that he's so amazing, it's the reality is because this is what Darren does at past NI weeks and whenever NI Connect and we get in front of audiences. The room is absolutely packed. It's basically like the Yankovic effect. Basically, you take any concept and you make people excited about it however it goes. I mean, really, I mean, a little bit less volume, but pretty much.
You are too kind, Norm.
It's true, though.
Thank you.
I speak truth. It's
it.
amazing. I don't know why people do it. No, it's true. I mean, it's amazing. Because it's not always about the concept per se. It's usually about the way that it's delivered, that you make it really understandable, and you bring a lot of energy to that. And all these things that we're going to talk about today, kind of trying to highlight that out. How are we doing, Derek? Do we have a producer here today? I'd turn one of these cameras around, but I'm afraid everything would just shut down, getting all fancy. I figure if you're going to have a presentation that's called the third best, you know, touting that you're the 2 best LabVIEW programmers, you better bring up the bar in terms of fanciness. So, all right. So for me on this front, I am a LabVIEW programmer since about 24 years now. And the reason that I put this up there is because if there's one thing about LabVIEW, I can be having a completely crap day. And I mean, seriously, like I've just had like the worst days, and for some reason something goes, and I'm like, I wish I could make something that does a thing in LabVIEW. And I just start doing LabVIEW scripting, and instantly my mood changes. I am a happier person along the way. So that's the kind of the impact that programming in G can have on my person. The other thing is that I have extended my world from just being a LabVIEW programmer to being an RF person. I will teach babies to bookkeepers, whoever wants to know about RF. I don't think I've quite converted Darren yet. I don't think I ever will. I have zero influence on him. I can attest to this. I've tried year upon year to try to influence him of things.
That is not true.
We've got one thing.
We've got one thing that we will talk about later
in this presentation, what I actually influence. But RF is one of those things. If anybody wants to learn about the fabric of space and time and how we communicate, let me know. I will gladly derail this entire presentation. Derek, you let me know if anybody says it. There's also an acronym called SMORES. Some of you may have seen me present it. It's, if you've ever heard of like Uncle Bob's solid principles, SMORES is a code principles that were handed down to me by my mentor a long time ago. Scalable, modular, reusable, extensible, and simple. That it falls just shy of RF and level of my passion. Actually, they jockey for position regularly. So if you ever want to see one of those presentations, it's probably one of the better ones I think I've ever done. It's been the most reusable one I've done too. And I love to teach. I love to teach, whether it's RF or LabVIEW or all these things in between for any party that will listen along the way. So I've been refining the art of what I've been doing over the years, including using audio-visual techniques as we've gone overboard today. Well, I need to take a picture of the studio in here in a second and send it out. Just in general, not only being fancy about presenting, but about sharing all of these passions that we'll talk about soon. So, I think Darren would agree that this is probably what, when I give a presentation, this is what I feel that I'm doing to all of the audience. I'm trying to get everybody passionate about something in particular, and I want to help lead the charge to a bright and amazing future along the way. And unfortunately, this is probably...
I don't think I can argue with the point I'm trying to make here.
You know, I left out comments about, low self-esteem and needing to present, and then you go and you can dig me like that. And but in any case, yes, the reality is, but you know what, if anybody has seen this video, you also know what this this video leads to. It's a discussion about being a leader and standing out in a field by yourself for a while and being persistent in something that you believe in until people decide to join you. And eventually there's a crowd of people that completely take over next to this guy and start dancing and partying with him. And so for all of these things that we're going to talk about today, whether I stand out in the field with Lone or with Darren, we will continue to talk about these ideas to try to get y'all on board. So,
all right. So you guys have likely seen presentations from Norm and me. I presented earlier today. We're presenting now. I'll be presenting later. You've got s'mores and a lot of other stuff you've presented over the years. If you've seen our presentations, you know that you probably recognize that Norm and I have what we might call divergent presentation styles.
Polar opposite.
You've got me. So my LabVIEW presentations are typically very practical in nature. You're going to come out of my presentations, hopefully, with some concrete things that you can do that day to improve your LabVIEW programming in some way. That's usually my goal, whether it's about, introducing new concepts in the language, or talking about ways to improve performance, or introducing new techniques to use editor gestures in the IDE. Like, I'm hoping that you come out of my presentations with some practical knowledge you can immediately apply. I like to include demos in my presentations. Most of my presentations have live coding demos. I like to be in LabVIEW, but not too much, as we'll talk about later. And my presentations, I try to rehearse them. I try to make sure that they're very clean in terms of transitions and demos and what, how things work and how things don't work. And typically, my presentations are ready months in advance. If you want me to present in July, I'm hopefully done by April. Then you got Norm. So Norm presents on concepts like s'mores. S'mores,
ideas.
S'mores is the Norm presentation right there. It's all conceptual. Norm presentations are typically very media heavy. There's typically a lot of AV stuff involved. You saw he had a YouTube video of the crazy dancer earlier. Norm's presentations, often he's kind of presenting off the cuff, right? Like, there's not necessarily much rehearsal that went into
It's in my
presentations.
head, researched in the head.
And Norm's presentations are typically getting the finishing touches and the save button clicked as he's walking up onto the stage.
We've done 2 minutes.
And so when you put someone like me and someone like Norm together, there's this phrase, lowest common denominator. And unfortunately, that means this presentation was finished 0.001 seconds before we actually went live. But all that being said, there is a lot that Norm and I agree on as to what makes a good LabVIEW presentation. So much, we thought we could make a whole presentation out of it.
Exactly. And we did. And now it's just a matter of if you can pull it off in time. So to this end, I wanted to speak to a promise, a very specific promise. This is actually probably another sub tip. When you give a presentation, people are spending their time with you, their hard-earned time. And what you should do is make a promise to them. And so our promise to you is that by watching this, spending your time, you will become a better LabVIEW presenter, if you're willing to recognize that it's not about what you want to present, which is a really hard thing conceptual wise to really wrap your head around. But the reality is that you need to be putting conscious effort into making people's lives better, which means not wasting the time. We'll talk about that. And then also sharing the right things and making the most of their time. And so that's the idea. It's the promises that you'll become a better LabVIEW presenter by recognizing some of these key tenets along the way. And then, of course, employing them when you try to present. So, all right. Tactics.
So let's talk about tactics. There is exactly one thing that makes a good presentation. Your presentation is good if it is interesting. That's it. All right, cool, sounds good.
What do you got? We got P. Terry's?
Yeah, let's get some P. Terry's.
We got lunch.
Double cheeseburger this time?
Yeah, get the lettuce wrap.
Oh, that's right.
We got more. We got
Low
more.
carb.
We got more. Okay. Oh, it's
okay. So we weren't really done, you guys.
Talk about it. Indeed. We're trying to make it interesting for you along the way. So some of the presentation themes that you need to be thinking about. This is some pretty good concepts to be thinking into. Make sure that people don't just remember that they were at your presentation, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I have definitely, I have to admit, I have given presentations where the next day I tried to speak to somebody about some of the content and they were like, wait, you talked about that? That's no good. People need to remember, they need to walk away from your presentation with remembering things that will make their jobs better.
Not everything.
Not right.
But definitely not forgetting everything as well. All right, so next up is that you want to have something unique. Now, Darren is kind of the king of this because there's always new fuzzy things that he likes to throw out to the world, shiny objects, as it were, and different tools and things of that nature. So,
yeah, I mean, there's only so many presentations you can see about a particular topic where when you hear about a presentation coming out on that topic again, you're like, I heard about that a million times. So try to make it something novel, something, even if it doesn't have to be about like a new LabVIEW feature, even if it's just like a way to think about programming in LabVIEW that people haven't thought about or talked about before. It's just something novel. Give us something interesting.
Indeed. So this is one that, of course, there's variable results on, but of course, rehearse. This is something that indeed is going to make it more interesting unless you're really good about screwing up. Because otherwise, people get distracted too much by the things that you end up messing up by in that one.
Yeah, I have a confession to make. I'm the one that put this one on the list. Norm did not put this one on the list.
All right, so next up is digestible. This is huge. We're going to spend some really good time talking about this, but so often there's just there's a lot of good ideas, and if you just think that if the more that I talk, it's just going to stick in people's heads, you're probably wrong.
Right, and one of the ways I try to work on that is I try to make my key points obvious during the presentation, but at the very end when I summarize those points, like that's the part that I hope will be digestible and that can help people recall back later to the specifics that I talked about on those things.
Yeah, one thing I love to do on this is like on a given slide, like if you were to like put like a big sticker on the slide, like right at the end, what is the point that people should have gotten? And usually what you can do, that'll usually start to pare down what you're thinking.
Great idea.
Cool. Next up, obviously you can see part of it is entertaining. Keep everybody awake, bring some energy. We'll talk about that.
Definitely. Energy is important.
And then lastly, make it relevant. And this kind of goes to the promise that we were talking about is it's great if you think something is wonderful, but if it's really not helping people go home earlier at night or kind of enjoy their lives better, like this guy right here,
Yeah, he looks like he's having a good
he
time.
looks like he's having a really good time.
I think all these themes are really, really important.
It should be. We should have like an acronym.
I wish there was a way for us to help people remember what these are.
You know, I die a little inside whenever I give a presentation and I don't see all these things.
Kill to have a good idea about this right now.
Figure
Oh,
it out. All right. So next up is distillation. This is one of my absolute favorites to talk about here. So distillation, you've got ideas. You've got so many wonderful little fuzzy kittens in your head. All these things that you want to share, and you've got to recognize it's almost 300 slides if you were to really do it. Darren and I actually ran into this in the middle of getting ready for this presentation because we're like, there's just so many. So the reality is there's a lot of things that you just have to recognize. Is it worth sharing at all? Right? And so and there's a lot of like hard culling away at that point in time. So that's kind of that first tank that you just kind of got to drop some into and let them be there. And then the next step is it essential to say the specific things right now? Your presentation is not a report. Your presentation should be giving you concepts and flow and some very interesting things that can only be delivered live. Everything else can go to kind of what I like to call a just-in-time bucket. So that could be on ni.com, on Lava, on the LabVIEW wiki, wherever it is. Go ahead and try to get that information. You don't have to give up on those kittens. Keep them, set them off to the side, make sure that people can get to them when it's important. And then the last part of it, if you know that it should be there, then you can deliver that material that they need just in case. It needs to be delivered live. It needs to be said that way. But I think it's that separation that can really, really allow for that mental relaxing, if you will, because it gets really cringy when you have to throw away ideas. But if you're like, I don't have to throw it away, but it's okay if I don't say it right.
Right.
All right.
A good example of that, by the way. So I have a presentation I've given, hidden gems in VI Lib. Obviously, I have the slides. I have the hidden gems that I talk about, but I also have ni.com/hidden gems, which contains way more material and discussion threads and downloads and stuff like that than the stuff that I put in the slides.
Absolutely. And one of the hardest things is the follow through to actually make all those other things happen. And I applaud you for doing that because I usually have a lot of good intentions there.
Yeah. I feel like you and I had some good intentions to put some resources together for this presentation.
We did.
There's not anything up there yet, is there?
Not yet.
We'll see what we can do.
We will get there. But we have a place for it, and we know
That's true.
those things that didn't make its way in will be there. All right, I'm going to let Darren take this one off.
All right. So I like my presentations to have a good flow. It can be distracting whenever things happen during your presentation that have nothing to do with the content you're trying to provide. And one of the ways that you can make sure that your presentation is great and it's interesting and it's not distracting is to do logistical prep. Now, I'm speaking more toward the less AV side of things. Like Norm is the audiovisual guy. If I had walked into this room and he had asked me to set this stuff up, I would have literally known how to do 0% of it. But what I'm talking about is more like on the assume someone else is getting that taken care of. What can we do? And one of the first things you can do is run-throughs. So again, if you're able to get your presentation prepared ahead of time, that gives you time to do run-throughs and make sure that all the content you have is going to fit in an allotted time. It also gives you a rough idea of where you should be at various points in the presentation. Like, if your presentation's in 4 parts, you kind of figure out, part 1, it's going to go a little long, part 2 is going to go a little short. Having rehearsed and having done your run-throughs is going to help you make those decisions.
Actually, one of the things I think is worth noting on that one too, even for me in the bigger picture, is knowing the words that you want to say for even a sentence. Part of it, because there's enough times where I think I'm going to know, of course I will know the words to say right, and all of a sudden, and it hiccups.
I'm exactly the same way. I mean, I find that happening to me, what's the word? A bunch during presentations. So I should have the words ready. Nice. You're right. So, all right. So another thing for logistical prep is demos. Norm and I are going to talk a little bit later about doing LabVIEW demos. And here's the thing. It's probably best to not go into your presentation blind thinking, I'm just going to fool around in LabVIEW for 5 minutes. You should really have a demo script. And I'm not talking about scripting the words you're going to say. I'm talking about the flow of your demo. And make sure that once you have that ironed or nailed down, Do not deviate from that. That's where you get blue screens in the middle of your demo because you decided to go with a different CRIO target than the one you had planned, right? Not to say that CRIOs are unstable in the project, but
That's all right. I do RF.
okay, and here's the thing. If you're doing live coding, you got to practice that live coding. I do live coding in presentations all the time. You've seen me do it. I make it look effortless, if I do say so myself. It is not effortless. I practice and practice and practice those demos. And when you see me programming in LabVIEW and you see me make a mistake while I'm programming in LabVIEW, I meant to make that mistake because I'm going to illustrate some point later as a result of it, okay? That's how much I practice my live demos. So
Really?
You didn't know that? Yeah, so that make it, and you got to make it smooth. Now everybody knows my secret, right? But that's okay. My demos are still pretty cool, I hope, even though everybody knows that my mistakes are on purpose now. And then audiovisual, this is more of a Norm thing, but yeah, make sure that everything, like I was telling Norm a story about how I showed up to an NI Week presentation one time, and my presentation was in an hour, and literally nothing was set up with the AV, and I don't know how to do that. My dad randomly happened to be with me at that NI Week, and he knows how to do that stuff, and he set it up for me. But that's the kind of stuff you want to make sure is set up early, if at all possible.
Kind of goes to the be prepared for things to be messed up on that front.
Yep.
So
Exactly.
all right.
And then, yeah, your presentation machine. So you should make sure that, you know, Skype and Teams and anything else and Outlook. Yeah, I still use Skype.
Jeez.
It's really good. Like,
It's okay.
you know,
You keep going.
I'm sorry. I could explain why I like Skype, but I won't. Okay, fine. Teams. Zoom. Should I turn off my Zoom? Anyway, anything that's going to pop up a notification during your presentation
And distract you.
You hate to see that
Like someone sitting
distraction.
next to you.
Yeah, and you know you're
Randomly
trying to
saying
you have a
things.
thought process and like there's just voices in your head. So anyway, get all those apps turned off. I was at an NI Week presentation one year where during the presentation the person's computer forced a restart because of Windows updates.
Ooh.
It was bad.
That's a bad one.
So and you know it can happen to anybody, right? So that's why I'm putting it in these slides. Just make sure, like seriously, when I give a presentation, the day before I go in to check updates and make sure that there are no like Windows updates that are going to reboot my computer.
All right. So the third generic. We're just talking about generic stuff about presenting at this point in time. If just Darren made this point, and I love it. It's like a boring presenter equals boring presentation, right?
Totally. You could have the most novel content in the world. You could have the newest LabVIEW framework that just blows Active Framework and DQMH out of the water, and I'm not going to retain. I'm not going to find it interesting if the presenter is just not into it.
Yep.
Along those lines, if you remember nothing else from my presentation, remember this quote. I feel like maybe everything I say in this presentation kind of hinges on this one. The audience can't be any more excited about your stuff than you are. So
Set a bar.
yeah,
They're somewhere underneath.
You as the presenter are setting the bar, so set it high.
And then for me in this case, if for everything that you do lack, you can make up and gloss a lot of things over with creativity and enthusiasm, which goes into the energy aspect of it. And there's been times where somebody went through an entire presentation after me and said, I don't understand what you said, but I was entertained. And as painful as it was to think somebody didn't understand, at least I brought somebody joy and entertainment.
Absolutely.
To their life during
There's nothing wrong with it. I probably wouldn't understand most of your RF stuff, but that's on me. That's not on you. That's on me. So as long as it's entertaining.
So speaking about LabVIEW presentations in general, let's talk about what makes, when we say a LabVIEW presentation, what do you need to do different about it? What is it in terms of a LabVIEW presentation? So kudos to Dan Press. I stole some of his slides, video here from the GDevCon NIA, and Derek Bomarito, who's our producer today. But in general, the idea is that you're going to run some kind of code demo. If you saw Darren's one, I just tuned into it while we were getting set up in here, and obviously he was breaking into there and walking through diagrams, talking about architectures. So it's not even always about the LabVIEW code itself. You need some other way to talk up, you'll be talking about something that's architecture related. You might be connecting to other things. For me as an RF person, when I do presentations, there's usually, you want to see some real signals along the way. Another one is the project organization. Very frequently we see, that's actually probably one of the key ones that pushed us both over the edge to make this, is people talking about their project organization and expecting people to understand what it is just by simply showing their LabVIEW project from 50 feet away with 8-point font and so on. So therefore, if you get that idea, like these are the kind of things that we can all agree make a LabVIEW based presentation unique. And so then the idea is that you're going to be operating between two domains and moving between them, like standing to sitting, right? And a good presentation does this split where it is making the right definition of what goes where when. This is a big part of a lab. If you're going to do LabVIEW, it's going to have all those things. Make the right split. And then also execute each one of those splits well. Kind of Darren's examples of what he was talking about of, you know, getting ready for the demos and things of that nature. Great example of doing that well. You have to have some skills to operate and do those things well. And then the other one is, of course, you need to be able to ideally gracefully transition between those two domains as well. Hopefully a lot better than our friend here trying to just sit down into the chair. It's that transition that can really bite a lot of times. Okay, so defining what goes where in a system. So Darren, we talked back and forth about this quite a bit, and I think you had some really great thoughts with regards to breaking that difference. Like some of that was pretty surprising, actually.
Yeah, PowerPoint gets a bad rap. I mean, we all kind of rag on it. I'm not very good at it. There's tons of tricks. Like when we were putting this together, there was, I think, at least 3 times that Norm did something in PowerPoint, and I was like, wow, you can do that. So I am not a PowerPoint expert. I am a LabVIEW expert, and yet when I give a LabVIEW presentation, I feel it is important to stay in PowerPoint as much as possible. That may sound like anathema to some people, but like literally it's the tool that we're using to convey the information. Like if you're switching between PowerPoint and LabVIEW, I mean, I definitely do that, but the more you do that, the more chance there are for like glitches, like you screw something up, and you're context switching, like, oh, the screen goes black and then the thing comes up and oh wait, now the slides are back and
Makes
oh wait,
it herky-jerky,
yeah, the window's still sitting on. So the fewer context switches you can have, the better. There's enough tools in PowerPoint to be able to sort of point at, like, draw a line under a thing, draw a box around a thing, draw an arrow at a thing, zoom a thing, right? Like if I take a screenshot of LabVIEW and paste it in PowerPoint, it's the size you see in the bottom right corner. Yeah. Well, I literally drag a box and now it's huge and you can totally see what it is. That's super easy to do in a slide compared to in LabVIEW. I mean, we definitely have tools we'll talk about later where you can, take a look at those things in LabVIEW and zoom in and whatnot. But like it's literally 1 second in PowerPoint and now your diagram looks big and you can read it. Yeah. So that's one of the reasons I think it makes a lot of sense to stay in PowerPoint as much as you possibly can.
Making it obvious.
Now, but I mean, definitely we're talking about LabVIEW presentations. I'm not a hypocrite. I'm telling you right now, I do switch over to LabVIEW plenty of times when I'm giving a presentation. So if most of your content should be in PowerPoint, when should your demo be in LabVIEW? Well, it's kind of hard to define. It's like, I wouldn't want to have to be the one to
it's hard to have like a specific rules.
Right.
To say yes
I wouldn't.
or no.
I can't make those rules, but I kind of know it when I see it. Right.
Makes sense.
So just a few examples, right? I'll give you a few examples of when your demo should be in LabVIEW. One of those examples is you are trying to demonstrate some features in the editor. So there's like a new quick draw plugin, or there's like a new right-click menu, and like you could have screenshots of that, but it's kind of cool to actually see it happen, right? Another one is if you're doing demos with hardware. Katya did a really cool presentation at
Vision, right?
GDevCon NA with Vision, and like there was literally like cameras and lighting, and it's like I'm seeing the image acquisition on the screen. That again, we could do screenshots in PowerPoint.
Just
it's totally
the same impact.
It's totally cool to see the actual hardware doing something.
Yeah.
Another one is if you are trying to sort of illustrate a behavior or a feature that requires a dynamic data display. Yep. Like there's something you actually need to see change. Well, in PowerPoint, again, you could include a video, but by golly, if you've got a front panel up there and you've got a graph you can zoom in on or whatever, so much cooler. Then you've got times where you need to actually like adjust and manipulate a front panel to illustrate something. That can't do that in PowerPoint. Yep. Whenever you have, Norm has in his presentations, he does not like queued message handlers because of the possible race conditions that can happen when you're inserting messages at various points in the queue. And I've seen him present on this multiple times.
Queued message handlers.
And the way he illustrates this is with a project with several VIs that are doing the same thing, but with like iterative changes. So you can see, oh, well, what happens when I make this change? What happens when I make this change? It's a lot easier to have that as VIs you can execute in a project. And then finally, just like advancing through slides is real easy. We can click our buttons or whatever. But there's times where you need to navigate the LabVIEW IDE to illustrate something. And it would be way clunkier if you had screenshots in a PowerPoint that you're going through than just navigating the IDE. So ultimately, I know it when I see it. And what I'm seeing is things that are just cooler to show in LabVIEW than in slides. I'm like, oh man, that's cool. Like, I want to see that in LabVIEW. I don't want to see that in a slide.
And the idea, even the definition of what somebody chooses can change over time. I think it's kind of like, when I see it, it's like, I know it when I can actually do it well, right? And there's an idea of striving to be able to, hey, if you're in LabVIEW, and of course, using some of the tips we're going to talk about later, that's a good idea.
Yep.
All right. So this is a demo that I was going to show, but I'm going to go ahead and skip over it, doing a little bit of an audible for this case. Okay. But this is a great, actually, let's just, let me just see if I get it. Let's go ahead, and it's an RF demo. I'm going to go ahead and just view it, and I'm going to go ahead and run it. And it just, it just shows some live data. It's not actually hooked up to any RF device, but it's showing what's happening in modulation. And I cooked in some tools where hotkeys, if I press C, it brings the cursor to the middle. Shift Z, it zooms out, Z, right? So it's just kind of boiling into this modulation format. Just a small view of it. And so it's those kind of interactivities that doing it just wouldn't be the same, right?
I love how you called an audible and then like 0.1 seconds later got sad at the thought of not having an RF demo. So you immediately called a reverse audible. I saw it all happen.
What is it called when you do lateral?
Yes.
It's a lateral. I called a lateral on that.
My dad calls it a double fumble, but he doesn't know anything about football.
All right, so LabVIEW architecture, talk to us about that.
All right, so there's a lot of presentations that I've seen over the past, I'd say 5 years, like when people have really gotten into the mainstream of giving presentations on architectures, whether it's a well-known architecture or whether it's something that someone has written on their own, or maybe even like a piece of an architecture, like let's talk about messaging, right? There are some architecture presentations that have broad appeal. I've seen them, I've enjoyed them. There are some architecture presentations that do not have a broad appeal. Some where you've got a room full of 200 people and maybe 5 to 10 of the people, the presentation actually appeals to them. So my suggestion is that when giving a presentation on architecture topics related to LabVIEW, try to focus on ways that discussion can be broadly applied to the LabVIEW world in general. Now there's exceptions to these. Like if you're giving a presentation like Introduction to Actor Framework, sure, that's obviously what you're going to be talking about the whole time. But I'm talking more about like concepts related to architectures. Like don't focus just on the details of that framework or architecture. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Yeah, there was another aspect to that I think is pretty important to mention, because it's sometimes concepts need or are worthy of being spoken of, especially when it's an architecture. Derek, I'm going to pick on you for a second. So web technologies, right? So Derek is amazing when it comes down to doing web-based stuff in LabVIEW. But I know that me personally, I need those building blocks. I need those steps. And if it is if it's an audience full of lots of people that don't know the web stuff, then maybe the time is better spent helping people step up and learn about those things. But there's also good stuff to say about the architecture and the implementation too. So I think it goes back to that, knowing the audience and trying to serve the audience more than getting specific notes out there. I'm sorry, I'm picking on you. Oh, no.
For those of you watching, wondering where Norm went, he went to go give Derek a hug, and he is now back.
I feel bad. I do. But it's the only thing I can come up with, right? It was rehearsing. If I would have rehearsed, I would have had a better example. Case in point. Show them how not to do it.
But then Derek wouldn't have gotten a hug. So I mean, So just to sort of close out the point here, there are definitely great presentations on LabVIEW architectures. I would suggest that if you are putting one together yourself, think about ways that your presentation can foster framework agnostic ideas.
Yep, terrific. Okay, yes, and this is indeed kind of that essence of what to leave out. It's that very first thing. You've got a lot of good ideas, a lot of good implementations, but that is at that moment of, all right, if the audience can't absorb it or nobody's going to really get it except me. I've given a few of those presentations before. Still feel pretty bad about that. So more importantly, how to choose. I think that's a great example of this. I mean, if you're going to walk away from the presentation with something, as Darren mentioned, push yourself beyond what you would normally want to do in PowerPoint. Try to leverage the tool more. You don't have to get super fancy with a lot of different stuff, but using things, simple techniques in terms of, like drawing people's attention to the thing that matters most as opposed to like a full diagram. That's a great example. And then, yeah, just kind of give into that, the fight that you'll have inside of it. Like when you want to write a program, right? What do people do? They open a blank block diagram. What's the best thing to do?
Yeah.
Think first, right?
It's a great point. In my opinion, obviously I've given many presentations. One of my favorite of my own presentations is what to expect when you're expecting an error. I've given that presentation many times. And when I finished putting that presentation together, I had no LabVIEW demos. And I felt really weird. But then I looked back at my material and I was like, I'm able to convey this effectively without switching out of PowerPoint. And I feel really dirty saying that, but it just so happened that like a well-constructed presentation, a lot of the times you can get everything in there in the slides that you need to.
Quite a bit, yep, with a little bit of effort. And then indeed, choose wisely when it comes down to putting things into LabVIEW. And then lastly, don't expect an audience to build a mental picture of your whiz-bang doohickey and consider trying to distill those concepts into better visualizations and use other people. And like take somebody who doesn't know a concept and say, does this resonate with you right away? Because very often we will talk about stuff. I did this for an RF one and I'm like, I thought I conveyed it. I said the right words. I even practiced. And at the end of it, I'm just like, I realized how far off I was off the mark. So, all right. So on to the tips and tricks. Certain things to do. We've already given a lot of individual pieces of advice, but let's go ahead and dive into it.
All right, so a few nuts and bolts about just navigating LabVIEW. So like when you have a presentation where you've decided, as we talked about before, the best approach would be to give a LabVIEW demo. How do you navigate the LabVIEW editor while giving a presentation? Spoiler alert, it's not the same way you navigate the LabVIEW editor when actually writing LabVIEW code. The first thing is presentations where you just kind of say, here's this thing I wrote, and you start digging into sub-VIs. If there's not sort of a roadmap for that, if you don't have like an end point of your destination when you're digging into your sub-VIs, that could cause your audience to get lost pretty quickly. And this sort of dovetails into my next point on the slide, which is you want to practice how you're going to navigate the LabVIEW code. Again, not something you do day to day. But when you've got your VIs up and you're in your demo, you have a point you want to convey by going into the code. Practice how you're going to convey that as concisely and quickly as possible. One of the ways I do that is I will create a project specifically for my demos, and I will include the VIs in the project that I can literally just open from there. And I didn't put this in the slide, but I will usually try to have the VI's window position saved so I don't have to move windows around whenever I am opening my demos. And that also requires practice,
especially
and
with
testing.
multiple monitors and everything.
Yes, exactly.
Oh,
I use just an insane number of monitors at my desk, right? But when I'm doing the demos, everything, that's how many's at my NI desk, yes. One less at home. So yeah, you want to make sure that those windows are ready to go. They're in the right spot. When they open up, they're scrolled to the right spot. Yeah. So like any less dragging around and moving around you can do during your demos, the more smoothly they're going to go. And then if all else fails, there are some LabVIEW programmers I know who are paranoid about doing live coding, which is, I understand, like it can be nerve-wracking.
Makes good sense.
So there are some LabVIEW programmers I know who will actually record a video incorporating all of the tactics I just described, and then they will play that video during their presentation and talk through it. If that feels like that's more your speed, that's great advice, I think.
Yep. All right.
Hey, we rehearsed this slide.
We did. We did. This is the one that
we left some yellow text.
Polish. We rehearsed, but not polish.
Oh, that's right. Murder P. I guess that's.
So the nuts and bolts for the front panel. This is one that will always kill me. We've given a lot of support-based presentations and other people, and recognize the people looking at. This goes for a lot of stuff. Recognize the people looking at your panel or your project might not be 15 inches away from the monitor as you. I mean, if anything, Derek, just go to like the full screen for us here. Get rid of this critter right here. No, sorry, just the double view, right? Yeah, there you go, right? What you're seeing here on your screen is what most people see from the back of the room when you're presenting. For the love of Pete, make it easier on them. Use some bigger fonts, especially when it's even like, see if I can go back to there we go. Same thing here, right? This is clearly not big enough for the way that it's viewed, but go ahead and, Derek, go ahead and flip back over to just that. Even as this is not made right now for the big presentation. There's a lot of things I would be changing on this. I'd be changing the lines. I'd be making the lines thicker. I'd be turning on aliasing even more. I already did for some of this, so I did make these a little bit tighter in. I'd be making the axes, the names. Don't use the default font. You've got to increase those font size. It's just nonsensical to think that people are going to see it, and I'll leave it at that.
Not nonsensical so much as I think some people just don't realize how big of an impact that can have.
It's true. I think that's good. One of the best ways to become a better presenter, especially when it comes down to some of these things, watch what people do and recognize those differences and say, I liked that. I should try to start emulating that. I don't think we see that enough.
I've tried to emulate some things that you do in your presentations.
Thanks. Next up is more that we didn't edit out on this one. That's okay. When you're showing off the diagrams themselves, documenting and decorating is, I think, a pretty decent tactic. But during a presentation, there's only so much that people are going to read on the slide deck, right?
Right. I mean, we're talking about like short phrases, short sentences, and free labels that are large. Like nobody's going to read a paragraph during your LabVIEW demo. But if there's a thing on the block diagram, like if there's an area maybe that you want people to focus on, a very large text, small words label describing that area of the block diagram, just so their eyes can focus in on it.
And I think actually I will get into the code here real quick just to showcase. Let me see if I can drag this over to the other monitor. So one of the tactics that I will tend to use is I will use a flat frame sequence structure to bound a chunk of code. It's better than decoration because then the code moves with things inside of it. You can put the free label, not the free label, but like the structure label on the inside or on the outside, as I like to do. It's just what I like to think of as a pretty good tactic for, like I said, functionally containing. For anybody who's seen a s'mores presentation, that's a big part of it, functional containment. And then it draws people's attentions and you can kind of select and showcase, and you can even color code the frame without making it too onerous along the way there. All right, so on the LabVIEW diagrams themselves.
Why are you even showing a block diagram in the first place? Like there's a lot of times where in a LabVIEW demo, again, someone may not necessarily be able to absorb what you're showing them on a LabVIEW block diagram. It may make more sense to talk about things more conceptually, or maybe pseudocode or something like that. Like is seeing this block diagram actually worthwhile? If you've got a block diagram where a lot of stuff is going on and there's like one area where somebody might, be wanting to focus, where you want to focus people, if there's just a bunch of stuff going on, people are going to retain 0% of what they're seeing on that block diagram. So really try to get the information density to a point where when you open up a window, everything the person sees is relevant to what you're trying to teach them.
Give them some room to breathe, visually breathe on the diagram, right?
Yes. So as I mentioned before, coming back to the labels and the decorations, if I've got a free label and a block diagram of a demo, the text is usually large, and it's usually a short sentence or a phrase to sort of, and maybe it's more to help me as the presenter to remember this is the part of the diagram that I want to talk about, and this is what I want to say about it.
An interesting thing in terms of decorations and labels, you could possibly use the octothorpe as a way of actually navigating to certain parts of your block diagram, that being the bookmark manager, right?
Yes.
So I think I've seen somebody actually do a presentation basically based off of bookmarks that they put in their code.
I could talk all about the bookmark manager. I love it as a code review tool, but yes, it could also be a presentation aid as well.
All right.
And yeah, going back to a point I made before, there might be times where, as much as it pains me to say this, there might be times where pseudocode or UML or like a generic block diagram or something might be able to convey the information you want to convey a little bit better than digging through VIs and going through an API.
Especially if it's like order of operations of, you cringe at UML, the sequence diagram, actually was something I brought up in maybe the second 7-minute presentation this morning. Like, it has a great way of visualizing this thing's running, that thing's running, that thing's running, data's running from here, especially like a DQMH when you got a bunch of individual actors going in that system.
That's true.
Don't try to show a panel and then show another panel and pop back and forth between
That's
those
true.
panels and diagrams.
Every presentation I give that relates to DQMH has at least one diagram from Antidoc that shows the relationship between the libraries and the messaging. And yeah, that's not a VI block diagram. That's sort of a representation of the relationship of the modules.
Yep. All right, so let's talk about whammies. That's a word from an old game show. What was it?
They remade the game show.
They did. What was it called again?
It was called Press Your Luck in the 80s, and now it's called Whammy.
Okay.
The new one's not that
There you
good.
go. Who knew? Learn something new every day. But so some of the things that are like real gotchas in this is basically unguided code browsing. Basically, you're showing a diagram and you talk to it. And there's a lot of things going on, and it's like, where am I supposed to be staring at? Let alone, it might be zoomed out pretty far, or we'll talk about that in a second. But it's like, what am I supposed to be staring at? You've got to draw people's attention to the needed and appropriate things. Another one is expecting audiences to understand as fast as you're talking and going through. You've been thinking about your architecture, your whiz-bang thing forever, and people are still just trying to get on board. So it kind of falls into that. What do you really need to be talking about your thing? This is a lovely one.
So let's say I'm giving a presentation and I show you this diagram, and this is a DQMH helper loop. So maybe I'm giving a presentation on how DQMH helper loops work. Well, I don't know about you, but if I'm looking at that diagram, I am not listening to you. The only thing I'm looking at is that kink and that Boolean wire, and it's driving me insane. So when you put LabVIEW screenshots in your presentations, if you don't want me to blow a fuse when I'm in the audience, then make sure that diagram is 100% clean. Because when I see a block diagram, my eyes scan it, my eyes verify, okay, this is a clean diagram, now I can actually pay attention to what it does. And if there's that stupid little kink in that wire, that's all I'm gonna see.
Another thing I would even say, there's that, which hopefully it didn't scare anybody away from becoming a presenter at this point. Darren's gonna go crazy.
It's true, I'm gonna blow a fuse on everybody now.
But I would also say that every wire bend tells a story, and it also conveys information. Now, this one's a waste of information. It's a distraction, and it makes Darren cray-cray. But if you've got a bunch of individual pieces of code, and I could show that diagram again, but I won't, where keep the bends aligned, keep chunks of data, wire-associated chunks of data, keep those things aligned and leave space around it to draw people's attentions to the right things as opposed to distracting them, much like this single little bend can distract.
All right, so a term that Norm and I came up with while we were putting this presentation together is the squint factor. So if I'm attending your presentation and my eyes ever do this, then that means that you have hit one of our presentation whammies.
Yes.
It is unacceptable for me to have to squint and try to figure out what's going on in your demo or in your code.
I had to. I already had it ready.
You did have it ready.
Okay.
So yeah, another thing that bothers Norm a lot is if you start waving your mouse cursor around something on the slide, like, hey guys, you see this thing over here?
And white mouse cursor.
I see your little white mouse cursor moving around.
5 pixels. Oh.
So another thing, we've seen some demos where, not to pick on any NI software, but I will. NI Max. If NI Max is part of your demo, then you've got, you're showing me a window where there's like a ridiculous amount of white space and like a couple of little things up here that like, targets or whatever that I'm clicking on. So, try to avoid having too much dead space. If you don't zoom enough in your presentation, then I'm going to be squinting. If you zoom too much, then I'm going to get vertigo. So like try to find the proper amount of zooming to do in your presentation where it makes sense. And Norm's going to talk about zooming here in a minute. We only have a few minutes, by the way.
Yep.
And then, yeah, get rid of those notification pop-ups like I talked about, turn off Teams and Skype and other apps. I thought you still use Skype. No. So anyway, yeah, try to avoid those context switches whenever you're presenting.
All right, so this is something that I get asked all the time. People go to an entire presentation. How are you hearing me, Derek, by the way? Is it not coming through? I guess you're going to have to wait a second to see if it works. Yep, that's okay. So I'll just talk louder. Hopefully it's coming through on Derek's. The idea of zooming in LabVIEW, people will see me on a LabVIEW block diagram, like what you saw. They'll see me zoom, and they'll be like, what did you just do? Well, there is a third-party application that Microsoft distributes called Zoomit. And it is a hotkey activated tool that not only zooms on your screen of interest, it also gives you annotation features, which is amazing. So let me demonstrate a little bit of that. So,
by the way, remember earlier in the presentation where Norm said he can never change my mind on anything except for one thing? This is that one thing. I gave a presentation a few months back. At the end of the presentation, Norm sent me a message and he said, would you please just start using Zoomit? And so, Norm's my very close friend, so I'm like, okay, I'm going to take him seriously. And I am a total convert. Now, I am a Zoomit caveman, okay? Norm knows all the keys. I know like 2 keys. And you can be pretty successful just knowing how to zoom and how to draw a box. And that's pretty much what I know how to do. And I think it's improved the quality of my presentations quite a bit.
Yep. For very specific reasons. One, you don't even need to zoom. You can draw lines, squiggles, change the colors, arrows, circles of various shapes and sizes, rectangles? Come on, one of them's a rectangle. I can't remember where the rectangle is.
It's 1.
What?
Control 1.
No. Anyways, there's a whole list of possible things you can do associated with that. And then you can zoom in. And then you can move around. You can pin it down. You can change your colors. Heck, you can even go to a full whiteboard with and draw the specific axes and then draw your overall spectrum of interest and things of that nature, red, and call those things out, and then back out and then go to the things of interest. Or you can zoom in first and then just highlight, hey, look at that. I love the expression node. Would somebody in LabVIEW R&D please prioritize making those work and better and faster?
There's a wire bend right there.
There is a wire bend there. You're absolutely correct. Hold on a second.
Okay, so
wait.
don't be intimidated by the fact that Norm just showed you like 5,000 things and zoom it. I literally only know how to zoom and draw a box, and that's all I need for
The
my
arrow is
presentations.
pretty key.
I just draw a box.
So
I draw a box around what you would draw an arrow.
the other one that's worthwhile is there's actually live zoom. So right now, before I was doing stuff, but now this is just going to chase my cursor around, and I
neat.
can go ahead and fix that as well, which is really nice when you wanted to highlight and showcase, hey, look at me, I'm going to a very specific spot in a palette.
Yep.
Because let's just get real. When your resolution's 4K, but even if it's like whatever modern sizes,
Yep.
It's just too much. Give people a fighting chance to understand what you're trying to convey. It's a simple tool. It's a free tool. It's fast tool. It's easy to download.
I'm a
and I don't
convert.
get paid for this.
I'm a convert.
So hopefully y'all could see that. And it's probably something that's even worth noting as well. It's not only for looking at a LabVIEW diagram.
That's true.
There's a lot of crap on my screen right now, right? And a LabVIEW, and an actual presentation, what do I want to show you? Oh, look, you can have it actually run when Windows starts, right down there. Look at that. And then you can specify the hot buttons that you use overall, right? It doesn't have to just be, it's any time that I am presenting, it drastically increases the quality and conveyance, and it gets rid of all the other chaff, right? There's always border stuff around the outside of things. Anyways.
All right, man, let's wrap this thing up.
All right, let's keep moving. All right, so the machine setup, this one I'll go ahead and take, because basically it's when you're looking at a diagram, if you've got resolution that indeed is set too high, you can kind of overcome that by indeed setting the DPI to like 150%, but do it before you start LabVIEW. I ran into this one just yesterday, or was it this morning? Whatever it was, very recently I was presenting, I changed the DPI afterwards, and guess what LabVIEW decided to do? Not show any of the palettes, quick drop, the context help window, they all showed up somewhere off the screen in pixels that I could no longer find. So make sure that you change it before you even start the presentation in general. Of course, the notifications we talked about, try to turn off things and virus scans along the way. And then this is a neat one. I actually taught Derek this one today, and Darren taught me yesterday.
Yeah, so when I give a LabVIEW demo, any app that I'm going to run, which is typically going to be PowerPoint and LabVIEW, and the presentation I gave earlier, I had some other apps as well. Move them to the front of your taskbar. And there in Windows, if you press Window 1, it's going to launch the first app in your taskbar. Window 2, second app. And if it's already running, it's going to bring that app to the front. That is a really great way to have seamless transitions between your PowerPoint and your demos. Just to go sort of more clearly, really quick into the procedure. It looks like we're about out of time. Yeah. This is the procedure I follow when I do demos. Press B in PowerPoint, the screen goes black. Press Window and then the number to launch whatever app you want to do your demo in. Once you've done your demo, click in the black background twice to switch back to PowerPoint. That's it. And that way you've got seamless transitions. You don't need to see the Windows taskbar. You don't need to see Alt-Tab stuff.
Icons.
Exactly. So that's how I do mine. And then make sure that your VIs and projects are already open so that when you switch over to LabVIEW, they're ready to go for your demo. Practice those transitions.
All right.
We've been using remotes this whole time.
Yep, use remotes.
Working great.
Large fonts. Leave the bottom 20% because most of the people in the back of the audience, if you're presenting live somewhere, won't see it. And then, of course, a link to download so that people can navigate and see your slides, ideally, when you're presenting as well, just in case there's people in the back of the room.
Exactly.
So.
All right.
Lastly, time management.
Keep an eye on the clock like we have totally not done.
No, we're good. We're 5 o'clock on the nose.
No, it's just 5:01. So definitely know where you should be in your presentation. Maybe present with somebody who doesn't talk as much, just hypothetically.
Distractions.
Make sure that if you have to start late, you can be the hero by finishing on time.
Or very soon afterwards.
Right, like
right.
1 minute later. Thanks, everybody. That's all we got. We really appreciate, and we hope you all learned something. And we hope to one day meet whichever one of you is now the world's third best LabVIEW presenter.
I'm into that. All right. Well done, sir. Thank you very much. All right. I think we did good. We only had to accelerate slightly towards the end.
Yep.
Don't worry. Oh, we're still live.
I'm
we
waiting
are still
for
live.
Derek to tell me that we're not live.
Well, we'll go ahead and mute ourselves here. We can still talk about it. It's okay. We're in a stream anyways, right?
Do you want to unstream?
I don't know. People are still in the room. We can occupy.
Questions?
We can occupy the space. That's fine. Anybody wants to ask questions? We're here
Well, one of us has a presentation later
at
on.
8 o'clock that you've written how many months ago?
Oh, okay. Well, then we should wrap up.
What's that?